Hi everyone, welcome back. Hope you've had a good week. This week we are going to summarize we're in 2 Samuel still. We're going to summarize chapter 13 and then read chapters 14, 15, and 16. All right, so chapter 13, the heading is called The Crime of Ammon. So here we are. So King David, two of his sons, keeping in mind this is pre-Jesus times. King David had multiple wives, children by multiple women. So you have a lot of half-siblings and step-siblings, things like that. This is not acceptable behavior post-Jesus, but we're in the Old Testament. This is how it was. So keeping that in mind, King David has two sons it's the way it's worded, it sounds like by two different women. So they would be like half-brothers. One of them, you have Absalom, and he had a sister who, Tamar, I think. And their half-brother, stepbrother, what have you, Ammon thinks she's really hot, and he hatches this plan with a friend to try to get her, and they treat her he loves her, but then he treats her really badly, and then he hates her and treats her even worse. Makes a bad situation really, really, really bad. King David finds out about it. Well, Absalom finds out first, and he's just livid, as one can understand. King David finds out, and the way it reads is, King David, who got word of the whole affair, became very angry. He did not, however, spark the resentment of his son Ammon, whom he favored because he was his firstborn. So he knows he's angry, but he doesn't really do anything about it, which Absalom clearly disagrees with, because what he does is he puts together this big party and has all the princes come, and while the party's going on, he has Ammon killed. And then he goes into exile because he knows that this is going to make his father very angry. So that's where we're going to pick up pretty much with chapter 14. All right, so chapter 14. When Joab, son of Zeruiah, observed how the king felt towards Absalom, we know the very end of chapter 13, it says that he reached out to him after a time. King David reached out to Absalom. When Joab, son of Zeruiah, observed how the king felt towards Absalom, he sent to Tekoa and brought from there a gifted woman, to whom he said, "Pretend to be in mourning. Put on a mourning apparel, and do not anoint yourself with oil, that you may appear to be a woman who has been long in mourning for a departed one. Then go to the king and speak to him in this manner." And Joab instructed her what to say. So the woman of Tekoa went to the king and fell prostrate on the ground in homage, saying, "Help, your majesty." The king said to her, "What do you want?" She replied, "Alas, I am a widow. My husband is dead. Your servant had two sons who quarreled in the field." Anytime they say your servant, it's a way of saying like I in this case. So she's like saying I had. "Your servant had two sons who quarreled in the field. There being no one to part them, one of them struck his brother and killed him. Then the whole clan confronted your servant, me, and demanded, 'Give up the one who killed his brother. We must put him to death for the life of his brother, whom he has slain. We must extinguish the heir also. Thus they will quench my remaining hope and leave my husband neither name nor posterity upon the earth.' The king then said to the woman, 'Go home, I will issue a command on your behalf.' The woman of Tekoa answered him, 'Let me and my family be to blame, my lord king. You and your throne are innocent.' Then the king said, 'If anyone says a word to you, have him brought to me, and he shall not touch you again.' But she went on to say, 'Please, your majesty, keep in mind the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood may not go too far in destruction, and that my son may not be done away with.' He replied, 'As the Lord lives, not a hair on your son shall fall to the ground.' The woman continued, 'Please let your servant say still another word to my lord the king.' He replied, 'Speak.' So the woman said, 'Why then do you think of this same kind of thing against the people of God? In pronouncing as he has, the king shows himself guilty for not bringing back his own banished son. We must indeed die. We are like water that is poured out on the ground and cannot be gathered up. Yet though God does not bring back life, he does take thought how not to banish anyone from him. And now if I have presumed to speak of this matter to your majesty, it is because the people have given me cause to fear. And so your servant thought, let me speak to the king. Perhaps he will grant the petition of his maidservant. For the king must surely consent to free his servant from the grasp of one who would seek to destroy me and my son as well from God's inheritance. And the woman concluded, let the word of my lord the king provide a resting place indeed. My lord the king is like an angel of God, evaluating good and bad. The Lord your God be with you. The king answered the woman, now, do not conceal from me anything I may ask you. The woman said, let my lord the king speak. So the king asked, is Joab involved with you in all this? And the woman answered, as you live, my lord the king, it is just as your majesty has said, and not otherwise. It was your servant Joab who instructed me and told your servant all these things she was to say. Your servant Joab did this to come at the issue in a roundabout way, but my lord is as wise as an angel of God, so that he knows all things on earth. Then the king said to Joab, I hereby grant this request. Go therefore and bring back young Absalom. Falling prostrate to the ground in homage and blessing the king, Joab said, this day I know that I am in good favor with you, my lord the king, since the king has granted the request of his servant. Joab then went off to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. But the king said, let him go to his own house. He shall not appear before me. So Absalom went off to his house and did not appear before the king. In all Israel there was not a man who could be so praised for his beauty as Absalom, who was without blemish from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. When he shaved his head, which he used to do at the end of every year because his hair became too heavy for him, the hair weighed 200 shekels according to the royal standard. Absalom had 3 sons born to him, besides a daughter named Tamar, who was a beautiful woman. Next heading is Absalom is pardoned. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without appearing before the king. Then he summoned Joab to send him to the king, but Joab could not come to him. Although he summoned him a second time, Joab refused to come. He therefore instructed his servants, you see Joab's field that borders mine, on which he has barley. Go set it on fire. And so Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Joab's farm hands came to him with torn garments and reported to him what had been done. At this, Joab went to Absalom in his house and asked him, why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, I was summoning you to come here, that I may send you to the king and say, why did I come back from Geshur? I would be better off if I were still there. Now let me appear before the king. If I am guilty, let him put me to death. Joab went to the king and reported this. The king then called Absalom, who came to him and in homage fell on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed him. Chapter 15. After this, Absalom provided himself with chariots, horses, and 50 henchmen. Moreover, Absalom used to rise early and stand alongside the road leading to the gate. If someone had a lawsuit to be decided by the king, Absalom would call to him and say, from what city are you? And when he replied, your servant is of such and such a tribe of Israel, Absalom would say to him, your suit is good and just, but there is no one to hear you in the king's name. And he would continue, if only I could be appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a lawsuit to be decided may come to me, and I would render him justice. Whenever a man approached him to show homage, he would extend his hand, hold him, and kiss him. By behaving in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king for judgment, Absalom was stealing away the loyalties of the men of Israel. After a period of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, allow me to go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. For while living in Geshur in Aram, your servant made this vow. If the Lord ever brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship him in Hebron. The king wished him a safe journey, and he went off to Hebron. Then Absalom would send spies throughout the tribes of Israel to say, when you hear the sound of the horn, declare Absalom king in Hebron. 200 men had accompanied Absalom from Jerusalem. They had been invited and went in good faith, knowing nothing of the plan. Absalom also sent to Ahithophel the Gileonite, David's counselor, an invitation to come from his town, Giloah, for the sacrifices he was about to offer. So the conspiracy gained strength, and the people with Absalom increased in numbers. An informant came to David with the report, the Israelites have transferred their loyalty to Absalom. At this, David said to all his servants who were there with him in Jerusalem, up, Let us take flight, or none of us will escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, lest he hurry and overtake us, then visit disaster upon us and put the city to the sword." The king's officers answered him, "Your servants are ready, whatever our lord the king chooses to do." Then the king set out, accompanied by his entire household, except for 10 concubines, whom he left behind to take care of the palace. As the king left the city with all of his officers accompanying him, they halted opposite the ascent of the Mount of Olives, at a distance, while the whole army marched past him. As all the Kerethites and Pelethites and the 600 men of Gath who had accompanied him from that city were passing in review before the king, he said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner, and you too are an exile from your own country. You came only yesterday, and shall I have you wander about with us today, wherever I have to go? Return and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord be kind and faithful to you." But Ittai answered the king, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, your servant shall be wherever my lord the king may be, whether for death or for life." So the king said to Ittai, "Go then, march on." And Ittai the Gittite, with all his men and all the dependents that were with him, marched on. Everyone in the countryside wept aloud as the last of the soldiers went by, and the king crossed the Kidron Valley with all the soldiers moving on ahead of him by way of the Mount of Olives toward the desert. Zadok, too, with all the Levite bearers of the Ark of the Covenant of God, and Abiathar brought the Ark of God to a halt until the soldiers had marched out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back to the city. If I find favor with the Lord, he will bring me back and permit me to see it and its lodging. But if he should say, 'I am not pleased with you, I am ready,' let him do to me as he sees fit." The king said to the priest Zadok, "See to it that you and Abiathar return to the city in peace, and both your sons with you, your own son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Remember, I shall be in waiting at the fords near the desert until I receive information from you." So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and remained there. As David went up the Mount of Olives, he wept without ceasing. His head was covered, and he was walking barefoot. All those who were with him also had their heads covered and were weeping as they went. When David was informed that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom, he said, "O Lord, turn the counsel of Ahithophel to folly." When David reached the top where men used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, with rent garments and dirt upon his head. David said to him, "If you come with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, 'Let your servant, O king, let me be your servant, O king. I was formerly your father's servant, but now I will be yours,' you will undo from me the counsel of Ahithophel. You will have the priests Zadok and Abiathar there with you. If you hear anything from the royal palace, you shall report it to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, who have there with them both Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Through them you shall send on to me whatever you hear." So David's friend Hushai went to the city of Jerusalem as Absalom was about to enter it. Chapter 16. David had gone a little beyond the top when Ziba, the servant of Meribal, met him with saddled donkeys laden with 200 loaves of bread, an ephah of cakes of pressed raisins, an ephah of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "What do you plan to do with these?" Ziba replied, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on. The bread and summer fruits are for your servants to eat, and the wine for those to drink who are weary in the desert." Then the king said, "And where is your lord's son?" Ziba answered the king, "He is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Now the Israelites will restore to me my father's kingdom.'" The king therefore said to Ziba, "So everything Meribal had is yours." Then Ziba said, "I pay you homage, my lord the king. May I find favor with you." As David was approaching Bahurim, a man named Shimei, the son of Gera, of the same clan of Saul's family, was coming out of the place, cursing as he came. He threw stones at David and all of the king's officers, even though all the soldiers, including the royal guard, were on David's right and on his left. Shimei was saying as he cursed, "Away, away, you murderous and wicked man. The Lord has requited you for all the bloodshed in the family of Saul, in whose stead you became king, and the Lord has given over the kingdom of to your son Absalom, and now you suffer ruin because you are a murderer." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, please, and lop off his head." But the king replied, "What business is it of mine or of yours, sons of Zeruiah, that he curses? Suppose the Lord has told him to curse David. Who then will dare to say, 'Why are you doing this?'" Then the king said to Abishai and to all his servants, "If my own son, who came forth from my loins, is seeking my life, how much more might this Benjaminite do so? Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. Perhaps the Lord will look upon my affliction and make it up to me with benefits for the curses he is uttering this day." David and his men continued on the road, while Shimei kept abreast of them on the hillside, all the while cursing and throwing stones and dirt as he went. The king and all the soldiers with him arrived at the Jordan tired out and stopped there for a rest. In the meantime, Absalom, accompanied by Ahithophel, entered Jerusalem with all the Israelites. When David's friend Hushai the Archite came to Absalom, he said to him, "Long live the king, long live the king." But Absalom asked Hushai, "Is this your devotion to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" Hushai replied to Absalom, "On the contrary, I am his whom the Lord and all this people and all Israel have chosen, and with him I will stay. Furthermore, as I was in attendance upon your father, so will I be before you. Whom should I serve, if not his son?" Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Offer your counsel on what we should do." Ahithophel replied to Absalom, "Have relations with your father's concubines, whom you left behind to take care of the palace. When all Israel hears how odious you have made yourself to your father, all your partisans will take courage." So a tent was pitched on the roof for Absalom, and he visited his father's concubines in view of all Israel. Now the counsel was given by Ahithophel at that time. The counsel given by Ahithophel at that time was as though one had sought divine revelation. Such was all his counsel both to David and to Absalom. And that's the end of chapter 16. So we're going to stop there for now. Yeah, again, the thing that I find really interesting is when there's somebody, walking alongside David and his men, and he's cursing him, throwing rocks, and one of King David's men went to kill him for it. King David said, "Why, what do we know? Perhaps the Lord told him to do this. Let it be." It would be very easy for a more hot-headed type to say, "Yes, off with his head for cursing me. I'm King David." But he doesn't do that. He doesn't take that route. Perhaps he's learned from his time. Anyway, on that note, let us bow our heads and say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen. All right, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.